Hello. Um, hello everyone. Apologies that took a couple minutes to sort out. XSplit was saying I'd exceeded my quota and they weren't going to allow me to broadcast. And I said, no, there is no such thing as a quota. And eventually they decided there isn't anything such thing as a quota, and therefore they were going to allow me to broadcast. But it does mean this is now turned into a 2-bottle of Iron Brew day. In that, this is my emergency reserve very, very bad day bottle that I may or may not store quite close to my room upstairs, but in a very far cooler space. So I don't have to go downstairs for it, but also so it's, not in my regular supply. It's the emergency bottle. And, yes, the emergency bottle may have had to be activated today. Right then, let's look at the live chat and say hello to everyone. Who we got here? Good Lord, Peter Davison, you were early. That was massively early. Hello. Hope you're well. John Shea, hello. Sadmiral, haven't seen you in a while. Hope you're well. DM Carpenter, hello. See you in 20. Well, it's been 25. I do apologise. Plebiscide, hello. Good evening. Ian Carr, hello. Albertaski, hello. While I remember, hello to Anne and Louise. Hope you're doing well. And, yeah. And Eric as well, if you're watching. If you're not, I understand. The Plebiscite, hello. Albertaski, hello. Dan Freeman, hello. Evening all. I'm afraid I won't be able to join in the chat or moderate this evening, as I've got other things to do on, but I will try to watch it on time, as they always seem more fun. I'm not sure if that's, that's playing. Is that playing cricket? We'll see. Hello, Andrew Bend. Hi, from snowy yet sunny Alberta. That sounds like a very interesting combination. That's kind of like the UK, but ours is usually rain and sun that's mixed rather than snow and sun. Hello, Aviator Enterprise. I'm doing Doctor. Don't know where to bring this issue, but Bilge Pumps on iTunes and Cinematech feed never uploads part 1 of any 2-part episode. I have no idea why. I have fun with Bilge Pump, with the iTunes Simplecast mix hookup. Bijan, hello. Ian Carr, hello. Gordon Collins, hello. Jalen, hello. Hello, Wesley Phillips. I don't think I've seen you before, so hello. Michael Rose, hello. Welcome back. Boreas Real, hello. Haven't seen you in a while. Jess P, hello. Yickers, hello. 401, hello. Nick Waters, drinking supermarket brew like the taste bud in band plants. It's one of those days, yes. The 2-litre bottle. Plus, these technically run out this year. I have worked out I've got 39 bottles, and I reckon I need another 6 in order to reach enough for the portion of the wall which I'm planning on doing. I'm not sure when I'm going to be actually building that wall, because it's when the garden office gets here. And then there is going to be a sort of little wall, because there's going to be windows. And the thing is, you don't want ever have bookshelves facing directly a window, because it can make the books fade the books. So my plan is to have you always have the window next this side. So the books are on this wall, that wall, that wall. There are no books on that wall. Well, there are books, but they're behind the cupboard door. There is supposedly a clothing wardrobe there, which may or may not be floor-to-ceiling books, but we'll get that to one side. So the wall which is directly behind is sort of the sunny window that will be in there will have an Iron Brew on it, and it will have a model railway on it, but it won't have the books on it. That's the plan anyway. Hello, Nautical Wolf, and Carl Van Gesbo. So today's topic. Today's topic is town class cruisers, and to give you an idea, it is 33 slides long. So, theoretically, 33 slides long at roughly 10 minutes a slide, which is the normal rate I do, would be 5.5 hours. So, the odds are we're going to be going at a clip. And that there are going to be multiple long patrols produced. And, you know, it's going to be fun to get through it all. In-car, Advent Calendar? Yes. Why the Town class when all ships are named after important historic British cities? Because... how do I put this? At some point, they are cities, but they're called towns. In terms of when the RN first names a class after these places, they're called town class because they are towns, because some of them don't yet have their city charter. So they're called towns because all cities can also be called towns, but not all towns can be called a city because they don't have their city charter. And remember, you need to have your city charter in order to be able to have a cathedral and various other things. So it's a fun... Let's put it this way. It's basically like when people say there would have been a CVO one called HMS Duke of Edinburgh. I look at people, I'm very nice, I point out, yes, there has been a Duke of Edinburgh in the past, which has been served in the Royal Navy. There have been ships called Duke of Edinburgh, as well as HMS Edinburgh. But no. As much as that might have been someone's dream, it would never have got past the ship naming committee because the monarch's spouse does not have a capital ship named for them. And that precedent and order of council was laid down when Queen Victoria wanted a ship named Prince Albert. And so for the Royal Navy to do it, they would not only have to ignore all the other names which could be used, like Ark Royal, Eagle, all sorts of other names which have got precedent for aircraft carriers and aviation capital ships, and capital ships themselves. They would also have to ignore precedent and historical orders of council. It just wouldn't happen. So it's why the town class are called the town class rather than city class, which is why when the people turn around and go to Type 26 and go, oh, they're the city class frigates, and I go... Traditionally, those names have all been accorded to a town class, but we're now calling them a city class because city's modern. And I'm going. Hello, Shuttlemac. That's an argument. Morning. Lacking in brew today, but looking forward to the good content. Brendan Kendall, evening all. Yes, well, I'm making up for your lack of brew today by being on my second bottle. Thunder Can Hammer, don't worry, I haven't started too much. Peter Everson, there is no need to be a city in order to have a cathedral. Lickfield is a town. Okay. I'm not going to get into the exact specifics around Lichfield Cathedral and how it happens. But there are a few cathedrals like it where they are not... You either have to be a city or you can technically be a county or a diocese, sort of large enough diocese, to qualify for a cathedral. Technically, cathedrals should always be hosted in cities, though, but there are ways around it, and I don't want to get into that because that's... there are ecclesiastical historians who specialise in that and will go into great detail and know it far better than me. 471. Didn't Victoria manage to get a ship named after Prince Albert? She did, but it wasn't. They were very careful it wasn't a capital ship. Brecken Kennel, does this mean I get my HMS Truro? HMS Truro has existed. We have wanted her. So, good evening, Buccaneer. You're not too late. We're just starting. So, before I get into cruisers and town-class cruisers, I want to talk about the cruiser age. And this is what the Royal Navy actually call it. And the Royal Navy dated the cruiser age from 1888 to just past World War II. But they were writing this in the 1930s. In fact, they felt the cruiser age lasted for about 62 years. And by cruiser age, they felt this was the era where the most important assets a navy could have, cumulatively, were cruisers. Individually, battleships, great things. Yeah. Aircraft carriers, amazing. Cumulatively, for the exercise of naval supremacy and maintenance of sea power and maritime dominance, cruisers. So, in their new cruiser design in 1931 to 35, which was pretty much a study put in place by a certain... Well, it was put in place by his predecessor and then completely changed the direction when Admiral Henderson got charge. You include this. So, 1888 to 1902, it was felt that it was constructors' materialism. I.e., the thing that decided what a cruiser would be was what the constructor was prepared to offer. I.e., what the constructors could produce. Naval materialism takes over 1902 to 1914. That is the Royal Navy seeking new ideas and innovation and pushing it forward themselves. So, whereas prior to this they've been dependent upon, many ways, the innovation of the individual yards and constructors who've been building cruisers, by 1902 to 1914, it's the naval service. Interesting enough, in 1914, they reckon this is taken over by naval requirements, i.e., the actual direness and situation of World War One, and they feel that they officially claim this stops in 1921 with the advent of the treaty system, and then it's after that is political requirements, which from 1921 to present, which govern cruiser design. However, the Royal Navy's own internal document has a lovely little question mark next to it after that 1921 on the naval requirements. And I think you all know me well enough and know the history probably well enough, if you've been watching the previous videos. If you haven't, this could be a surprise, to know that what I'm about to say. The idea that the Royal Navy naval requirements started getting forgotten for cruiser procurement in 1921 is about as far from reality as me testifying that I don't know, could win MasterChef. I probably wouldn't mind being on MasterChef if ever I get invited. I don't know what, the plain people's MasterChef. It would be quite fun. But I have a feeling I would get to about the quarterfinal. Quarterfinals probably maximum. I don't think I'd win because I don't probably do the style of cooking they do that. That would get me through that further than that. But that is about as close to reality and close to happening as the Royal Navy abandoning its control of its cruiser construction to politicians to tell them what to do. Shomak, what the RN should have said is well, hang on, no. First of all, Buccaneer, good evening. No, you're not too late. Shomak, what the RN should have said is we can give you a carrier named Duke of Edinburgh, but you have to give us carriers until we exhaust options so that's the next logical choice. No one wanted one that much, named Duke of Edinburgh. Andrew Ben, the RN can always claim that they can't use the City class as it's sometimes used for the Halifax class. Code Fate 190, hello. If you could have any town to have a cruiser named after it, what town would it be? I'm going to park that question, but remind me when we get to the ship reviews later. Because, honestly, I think there is one ship which needs to be it, and should probably be the name ship of the class we're building, rather than... I think it's going to be Belfast, which was the first one from memory, or Glasgow. And I'm sort of sitting there going, yeah, but there's one... Battle Honor-wise, should have been the first. Greg Sarski, good evening. Cadron, evening. Sean Mack, take a shot. I'm presuming that's a shot of Iron Brew, as I've just said, Admiral Henderson. Cadron, should we play Dr. Clark bingo card? You don't want to. This evening I will hit all of them. Vision, Prince Albert was dead when he got the 2R and ships named after him in the 1860s. Prince Consort and Prince Albert, yes, the typical Royal Navy. We're happy to break precedent once they're dead. Hello, Earthborn Gnome. Deb Squad, how about the generalized urban area class? Don't get me started. In the 1910 town class, from which the HMS Dartford had premier role in the battles of Otago Barge, at the mouth of the Adriatic. DM Carter, my copy of College of Ships Ireland came last week. It is at hand. When obscure to me ships such as HMS Prince, so I can keep up. Cool. Greetings, Constad. Brengannel, Falmouth, because there hasn't been one for ages. I do agree, and HMS Falmouth will be cool, but... But anyway, so, this is the cruiser age. Now, what else do I need to do before getting into the town class? I need to explain what a cruiser is. And for this, I go to Lord Hill Norton. Why? Because he's an admiral. Definition of cruiser states, the designation cruiser indicates her principal task, which has always been long-range patrolling, and from this requirement flows her chief attribute of endurance. A cruiser must also be large enough to keep the sea in any weather, fast enough to be the eyes of the fleet, to scout into shadow, to overhaul the enemy in the chase, and powerful enough to overwhelm that enemy with her guns, though not to slog it out in line of battle against heavily armed ships. A maritime island nation like Britain with vital worldwide interests has always been peculiarly vulnerable to the guerre de course, the attack on her merchant shipping on which her life depends. Thus, the cruisers became commerce destroyers as well as commerce defenders, the weapon of both the weaker naval power and the stronger. In the Royal Navy, the cruiser has to fulfill both functions, performing her traditional task of protecting the country's merchant marine from interference, and at the same time denying the enemy use of the sea to the shipping of her enemies. To a predominantly land power, cruiser warfare was a useful secondary form of offensive. To a maritime power, it was often, and out of necessity, defensive. Cruiser. So, here is the thing. This is the definition I use. Whenever I am talking about cruisers, this is the definition I go to. It's like when I'm aircraft carriers, I talk about... Where is this book? It's somewhere around me. Ah, yeah, Casper John's definition of an aircraft carrier. When I'm talking about cruisers, this is the definition I run off. So, if a ship fits this category, it is a cruiser. So if any of you are going through that list and thinking, does a Type 31 fit? What fits? There's your answer. So if it doesn't fit that list, it is not a cruiser. Okay, we can change guns for missiles and other weaponry system. That doesn't matter. But the whole rest of it is the definition of a cruiser. It's also the definition I use when I'm looking at sci-fi books about ships getting up to. If they fit this category, they are cruisers. It's something to think about. Dep Squad. Not so much a town as maybe a village if you're polite about how many people live there, but my choice would be HMS Nempit Throbwell. Yeah. Austin Hammond. Admiral Henderson is brought up. A tribal club battle or dying class is mentioned. Well, that's 3 shots already. Austin Hammond. HMS Warspite does anything. Austin Hammond. In the nicest way. Ooh. Bichon, it's easier to have a night out on the town than in a city. I'll sound Mahusiv. I presume these are the rules for the drinking game. Ian Carr. No, HMS Cardiff was a political gaffe. All other British capitals covered at city and port. Well, you see, I think that just leaves room for about 4 more Type 26s to be ordered. And I think the Type 31 should definitely be at 6 and Type 32 should be at 6. And so you have 24 frigates. And then I would argue that we need 8, at least, destroyers. But we'll leave that to one side. Concept. I'd love to do... Yeah. That's terrible, Colinstad. Brengano. If he's led on Warstream's warships tangential rant. I can go those. Dunderkammer. Regarding bingo, so we're sending keys to Singapore and plying the airfields as well. We can always dream. Turning 3434. Your mic is clipping somewhat. You might want to adjust it a bit. Okay, let me see. Is that better? I had to adjust it up yesterday because of what I was doing talking with Drac. And things were going weird. So I'm hoping that's okay. I'm watching the thing. It looks okay. Can never really tell. I because I can't listen to it and broadcast because it goes weird on me. And I think I have to pay for the next. I have to pay for this at some point. I do have to start doing the paid version of XSplit. Probably once I've got an office set up and a big PC to run it. They have, then I can listen to it while I'm talking out. So I'm actually just watching the orange bar. Hi, King's Rook. Colin said, so is the delineation between a cruiser and a battlecruiser basically a matter of caliber of main weapons? Pretty much. And a battlecruiser should have slightly better subdivision and better armor and be a much bigger ship than a cruiser would normally be, but isn't quite at the level at which a battleship is. This is why the Kirov or Peter Velikian sisters, we tend to call them battle cruisers because they are so much bigger than the other cruisers of their period, but also because they're nuclear powered. And it's at some side for that one. Heavy Enterprise. I'm guessing the scouting role was before the advent of the aircraft, correct? Not really. Because even when aircraft come into service, it's a long time before they are actually 100% reliable scouts. All weather, all circumstance. And then there is scouting in front of the fleet and scouting in front of the fleet. So let's put it this way. What you might consider how do I put this? What you might think of scouting in terms of long-range reconnaissance is definitely aircraft. But what we might these days call a distant picket or a forward picket, which is 100 miles up threat, they would call scouting. So that's what you have to start thinking about. Think about it as something which is far forward from the force, beyond normal supporting ranges of the force. Yes, now your sound registers your complete range. That's good. Janeth, that's a lot. I think description of a city, if a cathedral is the standard, but not big enough to be a town, I offer St. David's in the village in the same name. Thomas Vanderbilt. Ooh, town class. Sunk a couple of those, not so long. Evening, gents. I presume on World of Warships. Or something, whatever the Thunder. I keep forgetting its thing, the game's name. Vision. Cruisers carried aircraft as part of their scouting role on the fleet. At Midway, IJN used float planes from cruisers for scouting. Yes, they did. And we'll be getting into that with the Town class. No. I'm not even saying that, Dunrakan, huh? Shomak, battle cruisers should be larger ships than cruisers. Laughs in cruisers class. Don't get me. Oh, large light cruisers. Badhome, I thought that part of the definition was diplomatic element. Well, have a look at it. Her primary the designation cruiser indicates her primary task, which has always been long-range patrolling. What do you think long-range patrolling means? Presence. And as part of the presence, you visit ports, you go all sorts of places. That's part of the presence mission. So that's the first criteria you can ask for it. The first criteria for a cruiser. And it must be large enough to keep the sea in any weather, fast enough to be the eyes of the fleet to scan shadow, to overhaul the enemy and chase, and powerful enough to overwhelm the enemy with her guns, so not to slog it out in line of battle against heavily armed ships. Again, this is quite a status ship. Command and control, not there. That's not necessarily part of a cruiser. Often a cruiser is used as a task force command ship, but it is something more that has been added in later on as their numbers dropped, and especially in the US Navy and the Royal Navy to an extent. They are often used as the flagship, but that's often a group of cruisers. We're getting into that as well as we go through. Awesome. The other game you think of is War Thunder. Yep. Considerations, hello. William Cox. Between the wars, reboiling and upgunning, up-armoring was the main addition to the Congress as far as I know. Sides were bulged. It happens as we age. And AA batteries upgraded. Yes. But they start off battle cruisers. They end up fast battleships because they do a lot of internal work. A lot of internal work as part of their reboiling. John Luke. So all armed ships today are effectively cruisers. Depends what you think. First class, second class, and third class. Potentially. Mike Rose, this is all reminding me of dissertation. Town class and cruise in general got quite a few mentions throughout all chapters. Cool. So, this is the Shion Trident, and as, again, I have gone over this many times before, but I still think it's worthwhile going through. This is what the 1930s Royal Navy's thinking about. This is what the Royal Navy is thinking about in terms of its global trade. What it is worried about, what it is critical of, what it is very, very worried about, but also what it would disrupt in terms of war. Look at the nations around the world. Look at what it can think about it would be disrupting. If town-class cruisers have had a massive presence in both world wars, first through numbers and then through size and usefulness. Yes, but they were two separate classes. That helped. This is, of course, what the Royal Navy wanted in case of war with Japan, and where they would be positioned. Interesting enough, my betting is the town-class cruisers would have found themselves based in the Gilbert Islands and Rabaul, far more likely than the close areas of Hong Kong or anything like that, because of this. So, the Royal Navy in any war, what it considers the most essential are those routes in blue. Those are what it worries about. Yes, the trade goes through the Suez, down the Red Sea, and out to India and all these things, and I could put that in blue as well, but really, that's got to be put in green, because the whole Royal Navy's plan is always that it would have to convoy the routes in blue, but it would seal off the Indian Ocean, so the ships wouldn't have to be, so the convoys wouldn't have to be cruiser escorted, and would stop dead the routes in red. This is for a war with Japan. Okay? So the routes in red would cease to exist. Royal Navy would cut them out. And that is why the Town class end up at Gilbert and Islands and Rabaul. Because 2, 4, let's put it this way, at least 3, arguably 4 of those routes are best reached by operating from the Gilbert Islands. Squad, I'm sorry to hear about your lungs. Hope they're feeling better at some point soon. Danagama, gotta go. Catch up later. Take care. Sure, Mac, the RN is not gearing up for President's missions. Meet the Type 31s. They're all about President's missions. The RN has procured no commerce raiders. I have no idea what you're on about. Well, you know. The thing is, again, we go back to the cruiser the role. And this is where Lord Hill Norton really sort of does reveal it. In Royal Navy, the cruisers have to fulfill both functions, performing her traditional task of protecting the country's merchant marine from interference, and at the same time denying the use of the sea to the shipping of her enemies. Now, we're at some point going to be talking about the most successful surface raiders of all time. And I don't make this boast lightly. But so far, on a class scale, I don't think any other class managed to capture or sink as many ships, enemy merchant ships, as the Town class. Which is a surprise. Inca, who built the port facilities at Rabaul the Japanese used? Technically the Dutch, but, you know, they kind of had some help. I'm enjoying having some mentions of the Federal Balloon Corps in the chat. It's always fun. So, constructed in peace. Officially, the story that's often told is the Royal Navy starts off with Minotaur, which was due to be one of the two last Arethusa class, i.e. ships number 5 and 6 of the Arethusa class. And they get turned into the Town class. And actually, that isn't too far from the truth, because in many ways, the Town class is a scaled-up Arethusa class, in that the Royal Navy decides that the most successful of its light cruiser designs it's currently got in process of construction are the Arethusas. But they aren't big enough to do what it needs to do. they're in no way big enough to do what it needs to do. So it goes bigger. It goes really big. Gloriously big. You can see the 4-inch guns in this position. They are positioned slightly aft. Abaft the second stack and further back on the second structure, the aft structure. They have their guns positioned quite nicely. And you can also see that it has not just belt armor in the traditional sense. It also has internal armor of trunking and various critical spaces. So this is a ship which is designed to have almost crumple zones around some vital spaces, which will take the hit, but there is armor then inside of them. So it's a design which is designed to be as strong as it possibly can be. And before anyone starts saying, oh, they don't have forward air defense, they do. The forward air defense is the pom-poms around the forward stack on top of the hangar, and the forward machine guns. They're both they're two sets of quadruple mounts. Right. Jack, Rabaul was a German colony, then Australian manor, and then Japan captured. Also, Rabaul Bay is great. National anchorage, one of the best places in the South and Pacific. Agreed, but actually the dockyard was officially built by the Dutch to assist their colonies because Britain wasn't supposed to be upgrading in the interwar period. Jomac, denying the sea to an enemy is done in a peaceful and friendly manner. RM would never stoop to becoming pirates. I now know you're being sarcastic. Austin, given the RM definition of cruiser, how does the USN compare in terms of usage and development? I think there's an overall perception of US having less than overall worse cruisers. US cruisers tend to be more about their fighting battle prowess than necessarily their peace role. Jeff, the Town class cruisers of World War II are similar to the Troll class destroyers in that they never knew when they were outclassed and outgunned, no matter how big the enemy. Oh, certainly didn't understand that one. King's Rook. Regarding sci-fi cruisers, I'd say the Omega class destroyers from Babylon 5 are cruisers, despite the Earth Alliance only operating 2 ship classes. Probably. It's not piracy when you have a low remark. That's true, Dirt Squad. And Inca, where did the 6-inch triple turret come from? So, the Royal Navy starts working on a... Well, it's been playing around with a double turret since the 1920s. In the early 1920s. Since the late 1920s, they started working on a treble turret. Why? Because it was considered the easiest way to outgun the ships. Believe it or not, the Leander class were felt to be almost a little bit undergunned for their size, and the Amphions very nearly came out with 2 treble turrets and 2 double turrets. Treble turret design wasn't ready at the time. The Arethusa class, they did look at fitting a single treble forward, but they cited for maintenance issues that would cause it wasn't worth it. And then the Town class come along. And there, of course, 4 trebles. And at some points, they actually do look at quadruples for Edinburgh subclass, but they don't. Constraints. Towns look like economy boxes of the era. Interesting. Alex Miller. Good afternoon, Doc. Just out of class. Cool. Hope class went well. 471. Surely box protection for magazines. That is part of the box protection. Magazines are included in those box spaces, but those aren't just magazines. There are all sorts of core spaces put within that armor. So it's not just the magazines. And it was also a case of you have to consider traditionally the armor belt is on the outside. And they've moved it in partially to save weight, but also because they have this idea that means those parts of the hull, i.e., these bits, will actually have almost, because they can afford it, will have almost the same effect as the capping plate on a sort of on battleships, but on small, of course, 6-inch and 8-inch rounds at significant range. In that they will stop the explosion going off in a place which is vital, which will force it out the ship. So that'll keep the ship structurally very strong. It's basically putting up using the hull as an extra screen. So here are the stats, and I'm going to disappear again. So, please notice, now at no point does the displacement, of course, include any water-based armor. No point. Just remember, Admiral King hated the Royal Navy for this. In fact, if you wanted to make him spin in his grave, you'd probably stand over it and go, water-based armor. Just say it often enough and you could probably power most of North America from the spinning. Right then. So, the Southamptons, the first batch, are 9,100 tons in standard. The Gloucesters are 9,400 tons in standard. The Edinburghs are 10,550 tons in standard. Please note again, the weight displacement of the Southamptons and the Gloucesters goes up dramatically once they have their full war fits in World War II in 1939-1940. Their weight does go up, and so does their speed, because again, there are declared speeds here of 32, 32 and a half, these sort of knots. Again, you can go to various events and they're saying they're doing their top speed. The timeline doesn't fit if they're doing these speeds. They must be going faster. It's an interesting time. Length 591 feet 6 inches for both the Southamptons and Gloucesters. And for the Edinburghs, that stat is wrong. I know it's wrong. Oy, caramba. You know how I know it's wrong? Because I was actually looking at it this afternoon and not remembering I needed to correct it because I had copied and pasted and held it to hold its place. I don't know. Twit. The Edinburgh class are 613 feet 6 inches, or 186.99 meters overall. So to get from an Edinburgh, Gloucester to an Edinburgh, you have to add on an extra 22 feet. Everything else is right. I do apologize for that. Capping plate, yes. Well, that's what it felt it would work like. William Cox, oh, I am the cook and the captain bold. I'm not sure what's going on here. John Luke, USN cruisers are built for battles. RN cruisers are built for wars. Wonder how USN commander Lion would feel how good his ship was being run down by RN commanders behaving like wolves. Fun or not? It's the interesting scenario is that the RN cruisers do tend to hunt in packs. They do tend to hunt in packs, but you know, USN ones do quite well as well. The USN are good ships. Remember, the nations aren't building that differently. They're building because they're wrong or right. It's because they're building for different wars. We go back to this one. The Royal Navy is building for a global war. The US Navy is building to fight largely in the Pacific. That's where they think their war's going to be. So if you can afford to build your Navy to focus on one ocean, you're going to. But that's going to be a very different Navy than a Navy which you're building to fight in the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, the Indian Ocean, and the Pacific. Probably simultaneously. It's going to be, by its definition, a very different Navy. Bring copy paste fail. Yes. Basically, I was doing the building. I tried to copy and paste a table into this, and it didn't work. So I built a table and was then writing it up, and it just went. The beam of the Edinburghs was 63 feet 4 inches. And that isn't wrong. That's wrong again on mine thing. So it was wrong. Yeah. And draft was 21 feet 3 inches. Although Belfast after reconstruction does change. Belfast after reconstruction goes up to Belfast after reconstruction goes up to a beam of 66 feet 4 inches and a draft of 23 feet. Mainly to try and hold her together after, of course, the mine broke her back. So there's a slight difference. As you can see, fairly good though. The armor is correct and everything else. Basically, everything barring the dimensions for Edinburgh's is correct. So I do apologise about that. 4.5 inch armor main belt, 2 to 4 inch on the turrets, 2 to 3 inches over the deck, 3 inches over the magazines, 2 inches over most of the machinery spaces, and there does seem to be 3 inches over most of the trunking. You will notice though that the Gloucesters increase by about 300 tons, and most of that tonnage is extra armor. Most of the difference between the Gloucesters and the Southamptons is extra armor. Inkar, how close was HMS Belfast to being scrapped following mine incident broke her back? If it had been a year later in the war, and they'd had the production of Crown colonies delivering at the pace it was later, I don't think she would have survived. I don't think she would have been kept. But at the time, they had a complete cruiser, and they thought they could refix her quite easily, because whilst the broken back isn't a great thing for a cruiser, it's easier to fix than a lot of other things, especially when you consider the rest of the cruiser is all fine. And the reason she's actually in so long is because of struggle getting materials, but also because they decided to upgrade her at the same time as they are doing what they're doing. Nick Waters, Gloucester's compliment looks high. No, that's the correct compliment for them. Again, I checked that out. Now, the reason the Gloucesters actually have a higher complement than the Southamptons or the Edinburghs is because you notice that they've got a higher rated speed and a higher rated horsepower, but they have more confined operating spaces, which means they actually need more people to man the engine rooms. I'm not sure if this quotes quite into 69 people, but apparently that was the difference. The Gloucesters carried a slightly larger Marine unit, RM unit, than the Southamptons did, although the Edinburghs had them. So there is a reason for it. Don G. Power stats look screwy. 2Es apparently go faster with less power and more weight than the Gs. That's because they're longer. That's their stats. And it does make sense. It's the length and the shape of the hull can affect these things quite considerably at this point. And honestly, I trust those rated high top speeds about as much as I trust the US Navy when they tell me the maximum speed of their aircraft carriers, in that they probably think I'm born yesterday. Brengandon, the more I read about the British Pacific Fleet, the more I think Americans drowned the wrong admiral in the Atlantic. King was liability. No, he was America. He was very sensible for America. Not maybe sensible for the war as a whole, but he was very understanding of the realities of the American situation. And he was very focused on American interests first. And that's what an admiral of the fleet, admiral in charge of a navy is supposed to do. He's supposed to put his nation first. That's good. Re Belfast, did the opportunity to upgrade a lot of systems on Belfast factory and keeping her rather than scrapping her? Yes, because it made upgrading her easier later. Hmm. Nautical Wolf, that seems counterintuitive. Welcome to the Sum of the Worlds of Ship Design. Oh, and by the way, even all these figures are all averages because, let's be honest, HMS Birmingham doesn't have the knuckle bow that the rest of the Southampton, the rest of the entire town class has. She has a different shaped bow, which affects her speed and operating characteristics. Two of them have slightly they have 3 different generations of Admiralty free. They're called free tube boilers, and those systems they keep evolving. They're called they're called the free tube boilers, and they are so no 4 Admiralty free drum boilers. The free drum boilers. Sorry, calling them free tube drums. Not sure why. So the Admiralty, the free drum boilers keep changing and keep evolving, which affects things, and it just there's a lot of shaft horsepower going on, but also there's the effectiveness of their deploying that shaft horsepower for getting the speed. There's propeller design, cavitation, hull design, hull shaping, all sorts of things go into getting that top speed. Nick Waters, I guess once spread across watches, it's not a big difference in number. Nope. You divide that by 3, and that's 23 extra people. Versus Southampton. Shomack, the RN was definitely not using the extra crew and Marines for prize crews for the commerce raid they were doing. In car, transom sterns on the Edinburghs. Not quite transom sterns, but they definitely were modified sterns compared to the rest. William Cox, back in the 70s, the Knox class was built with underwater hydraulic stabilizers to keep the roll down. These were effective. I wonder if other surface classes do it today. They have all sorts of things in them for them today. So, here is me talking about the various, what they're getting at. So, this is peacetime. What do they get launched into? Well, I often talk about the ones which go to the Far East, but as they're coming to service, Belfast and Edinburgh are being keyed up to go to the Far East. They're the ones which are going to go and be part of the China station. But they don't get there because 1939 happens and they're added in 1939, and there's all these things going on. Second Cruiser Squadron are at home, and this is a picture of, I'm not sure which of the two Town class cruisers which were involved, but it's taken from the stern of the Royal Yacht during the royal visit to Canada in 1938, I think, from memory. And she's just motoring. They were escorted by two Town class cruisers. The Royal Navy was sending the royal family out around the world, and they gave them two Town class cruisers to show up and go, they will be safe. And it's kind of a warlike thing to do because there's also there's about 3 cattle ships sailing around that portion of the North Atlantic at that time. There's 2 cruisers with the Royal Yacht. There are 2 destroyer flotillas out hunting around. It's really not a good scenario. If anyone was going after the Royal Yacht in 1938 because they thought they'd perhaps do something which could cause internal trouble for Britain, it wasn't going to happen. It wasn't going to happen. They were escorted heavily. King's Wolf. Harry Dwarf class Arctic and offshore patrol vessels RCN have an intractable weakness to stabilize the ships under normal conditions, as their hulls are optimized for icebreaking. But it's a pretty cool picture. And in the file, I think this is a photo which was sent to the Royal Navy by the royal family. And I think the rest of the pictures of this file, including the notes as to which of the cruisers this is, are stored in Windsor archives. So that I would love to someday to get into the Windsor archives and have a look for it. Because there is a little funny rumour attached to this particular document and the picture in the archives, in that it might have been a very, very royal photographer who took that photo. Because on the convention aboard the Royal Yacht when they were at sea was that you either had to, if you were doing portraits, there was an official royal photographer along to take the portraits. But any candid photos, and this is considered is a candid photo, that's what it's described as, are taken by the royal family themselves. They're the only ones allowed to take the photos on the Royal Yacht. That was one of the conventions at the time, I've read. I'm not sure if it's true, but this could have had a very royal photographer. And it's just a cool picture. What were they also getting up to? Meet Exercise CD. Now, what is Exercise CD? And no, it's not compact disc. Exercise CD is, how are we going to deal with surface raiders? How are we going to deal with surface raiders? Well, that is an interesting question. How are we going to deal with surface raiders? Well, we don't know. So what do? They have an exercise. And look at who's the surface raiders are. If you're not sure, I will read them out to you. So we have Force D is Nelson, Faulkner, Boreas, and Boadicea. Force E, Revenge, Rodney, Newcastle, Basilk, Fame, Foresight, and Fearless. Force F, Southampton, Royal Sovereign, Kempenfeld, Bulldog, and Firedrake. The idea was HMS Southampton would break out into the ocean. HMS Southampton succeeds very successfully. At one point, by actually pretending to be the Deutschland, but we'll leave that to one side. She manages to avoid everyone and get out. And this forces the RN to start really thinking about how they're going to do the defense in depth, because they were thinking about trying to do forward engagement of surface raiders. And they realized they can't do it in terms of the way they'd like to do it. They need aviation cover. They need aircraft cover. There is a great discussion after this between the Royal Navy, a very senior gentleman in the Royal Navy, and please note when this exercise takes place. It is 1938. A third Sea Lord and a first Sea Lord might team up to go and have a conversation with the Chief of the Air Staff to explain to him exactly what went wrong with Coastal Command and how the fact that they could produce in an exercise where they apparently assigned 3 squadrons or the full Coastal Command strength available at the time, but could only generate 3 aircraft to actually take part in the exercise and be scouting, and that was a peak, possibly excised them both. And whilst in 1938, decisions already sort of being made that the Fleet Air Arm in 1939 is going to go to the RN, after exercise CD, where HMS Southampton managed to trump Coastal Command and the Royal Navy Surface Forces quite successfully, there is a concerted belief by several members of Parliament and several members in the wider military, including the Army, members of the Army get involved in this, that Coastal Command should also be transferred back to the fleet, because they feel the RAF is not doing well enough with it at this point. And the RAF sincerely promises, no, we'll fix it. We're sorry, it was a freak thing. We'll do another exercise. We'll do better. They do another exercise. It doesn't go that well, but they're putting in long-term plans. The Navy already has ideas of how to take over the Fleet Air Arm. But the trouble is, the Royal Navy doesn't have any involvement in Coastal Command. They work with them a lot, but whereas the Fleet Air Arm by this point has 70% RN pilots, 100% RN observers, about 50% RN fitters, fit roughly, coming in and sorting it out. It has no involvement in Coastal Command. So for it to take over Coastal Command, you would have to transfer all those people who joined the Royal Air Force to the Royal Navy in order for it to work. And there was a big dispute about whether or not that could be done. Grace Sarsky. Her Royal Highness Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret were given box brownie cameras at some point. A lot of 1930s candid photos of the royals were taken by them, so who knows? It does look like the kind of quality, if we go back to that picture, a box brownie would take to me, to my eyes. But this could be partially my wishful thinking. I do admit that. It could be the professional photographer on the ship took it and all this sort of thing. But there's also part of me that goes sort of, looking at this photo, it looks like a box brownie photo, and it looks like something someone who's still learning their craft as a photographer would take. Please excuse the bright lights from the National Archives in the top there. I just think it's a really nice photo, and I love it. And I would, as I said, I'd like to learn the story behind it. So I have been applying every year since I found out about that photo to go to the Windsor Archives and have a look for it. And so far, I'm at year 5 of applying and no entry. So if anyone has any connections with the Windsor Archives, don't bother trying them on Twitter. I've tried that one. All sorts of other things. So if anyone knows anyone at the Windsor Archives and can put me in contact through the lovely thing that is Discord, I would be very, very thankful. Because they don't even respond to my emails anymore. John Luke, what about exercise? What would Vian do with his destroyers? In this exercise, Vian would probably be hunting separately with his destroyers, or he would be escorting Hood, if Hood was involved. It's one of those scenarios, okay? This is an exercise where the Royal Navy sets itself up to lose. Because that's the interesting thing about the Royal Navy exercises. When you have the Royal Navy writing an exercise, it's very rarely writing it so that it will win. It's writing it so it'll lose, because it thinks you learn more from when things go wrong. And you've got a disadvantage. Because you have to make the right decision. Mm-hmm. Nick Waters. Standard narrative is Coastal Command got whatever worn out leftovers from RAF Bomber Command. It's not quite like that. In fact, in terms of people, they get some of the far better pilots, I would argue, Coastal Command get than the Bomber Command, because quite a lot of the pilots are the ones who really, really love the flying. But it certainly isn't. It's certainly a Cinderella. I would always say, in terms of Cinderella services, you see, up until 1935, I would say the Air Ministry is pretty even-handed. And I would go to say it actually does even a fairly good job of supplying the Fleet Air Arm, RAF Fighter Command, RAF Coastal Command, and RAF Bomber Command with aircraft. I would argue after 1935, the bomber will always get through doctrine, and the focus on heavy bombing really starts to come through. And I would argue it reaches its nadir in 1938, its highest point. And from that point onwards, the RAF is sort of either forced by outside occurrence or by its own internal realization to start looking at other sections of it and go, yes, you need money. You need support. Mm. Bragging it up. I really prefer the amateur photos I come across. They are much more human, less posed, more real. you're going to love some of the stuff we've got in here, some of the photos. Some of them are pose photos. Some of them are amateur photos I've managed to track down. And I have to say I've been helped by Wikipedia a bit. And I know that because some of the I try and check the copyright of the photos which come here, and sometimes there are photos which I would love to use, but I can't find the copyright details of. But I can sometimes find them if they're posted on Wikipedia, because Wikipedia, the one good thing, again, whilst I will tell my students not to use Wikipedia because you don't know who the author is, so you don't know who to blame for things, but you can go and use the source of this down below. Go to the bottom of the page and click on the sources. They can be quite good. But if you want copyrighted, check the copyright of the photos, that is something Wikipedia is usually fairly good at. Grace Nelson, perhaps a letter to Her Majesty. I might try that. William Cox, Commerce War is all about rising prices of transport. And price of sea transport. Instituting a coastal convoy system was a huge expense. In retrospect, delaying the implementation of coastal convoys was a bad decision. Yeah. I think there's a debate going on about King and convoys here. The point is, you can't just implement convoys. Yes, convoys is the right thing to do, but to actually implement convoys, you first need the infrastructure in place to support it. And that infrastructure is a lot of people. That infrastructure is a lot of construction. That infrastructure is a lot of organization. Okay? The advantage the Royal Navy has in 1939 when it implements convoys is the experience at the end of World War II and the fact it had kept that experience going. And it had kept, in many ways, the command structures in place. It had the various Western approaches commands and various commands in place, with officers and staffs in place to do it. Okay? Yes, we can agree King's decision was not the right one. But I often think a lot of his bluster and his thing about, oh, we know better and all this stuff is actually covering for the mistakes the US Navy had made for years prior to that in not developing the infrastructure they would need to do a convoy system. In that case, it's not King's fault. It's his predecessor's fault. You've had convoys used in World War I. By 1941, that is 23 years previous. Yes, King has been around for a few years. Yes, theoretically, he has time to do it. But he's also dealing with a massive rearmament program, growth of Pacific conflict, potential conflict in Pacific, and all these other things. He has lots of calls on his limited resources. If these things hadn't already been set up, there's not really much chance he's going to set them up on his own initiative in peacetime. It will take time. Scott, you probably need better pilots in Coast Command. Much harder to navigate and much easier to become disoriented over water than over land. True. You also tend to have very good navigators in the Coast Command. P. Davidson, Ansons and Hudsons were specifically bought for Coastal Command. Yes, they were. They weren't the greatest aircraft, but they were bought for Coastal Command. Sure, there's no point to worry about arguing with people over King. As I was saying, I don't think you can blame King entirely for that. I think you can say, in many ways, he could have held his hand up and said "mea culpa." In that, as a service, we haven't done this infrastructure. We haven't put these things in place. We haven't done exercise and things like the Royal Navy's doing in 1938 with exercise CD. And various other exercises they've done in terms of thinking about this. But there's also the fact that neither had anyone else of his predecessors. And at no point have you had the US Senate go, why don't we have this? No one has really asked that question in US politics. It was presumed it wouldn't reach them. America's logistics, America's infrastructure, incredibly dependent upon sea transport at this time. Incredibly so. Still is, arguably. Road and rail take up a huge chunk as well. rode massively for the America, but sea still is a major chunk of American infrastructure. And I would argue that to this day, still not investing in the idea of what happens if you need to protect it. John Luke, war games where you win are just glorified parades. If you want a good war game, you tell the op 4 to hurt you and think of new ways to hurt you. Then you reduce risk long term. In the RN, the tradition is that whichever side wins, the other side has to buy them all drinks, and they get bragging rights. For some reason, this can turn these war games into bloodthirsty blood feuds. Tom Final, I completely agree with that. I often go to Wiki only to steal the sources, which are often Class A. Like on the Chernobyl disaster, I just found primary material. Great. Yeah. The reason you can't use Wikipedia if you're writing an academic book is because there isn't an author listed or an editor. So there's no one responsible for it. And that's the thing. You have to be able to ascribe responsibility for it to be used as an academic source. That is the thing. So when my work, you can of course describe it as Clark. Wikipedia isn't a corporate entity. It isn't, so that's why you can't use it like that. But as a reference, it's often very good. And as said, you can go down and use the sources. Thanks for weighing in, Doc. I'm trying to help. Right. What is the Royal Navy doing in the Indian Ocean? What are the Town class doing in the Indian Ocean? Well, prior to World War II, they are, of course, showing the flag. And this is a classic showing the flag operation. So, you have the 4th Cruiser Squadron in the East Indies, Indian Ocean, which is made up of Manchester, Liverpool, Gloucester, HMS Norfolk, County class, and HMS Enterprise, E class. That's a nice group of cruisers. And they're doing their imperial policing. And this is, I think, from the story of... I think this is Manchester's patrol. Yeah. ADM 19752. Shamak, the US was also gearing up to take over the western half of the Atlantic in 1943, I believe, if I remember correctly. They did think that would be when they would have to do it. But remember, this was 1941 when war happened, and they only agreed to 1943 and 1942. And they didn't even really have the things in place. And also, the thing is, you have Admiral Noble sitting there. This is the one point I do find a bit of problematic with King, in that, like the British or not, you have the guy sitting in Washington, who is the British delegate to America, who set up Western Approaches Command, who got it running, who Max Horton's now sort of inherited and gets all the credit for, but who's actually done this all and set it all up. If I'd have been king, I would have swallowed my pride, taken him out to dinner, and gone and basically just pumped him for information, food and whiskey, until he told me everything I needed to know. King doesn't do that, and for that you can sort of go King. But as I said, King's got limited options, and if he admits that the Navy's been a failure, it hasn't done the preparation it's supposed to do, and therefore isn't able to do it because it hasn't got preparation, then he's going to get asked a lot of difficult questions in Congress when he's asking for a lot of money. So he can't do that. Now, if you consider this one, on Saturday, 25th March, in a consumption trial at 27 knots was carried out, and the ship arrived at Mercury at 09:15 on Sunday, 26th March, anchoring in False Bay. That's good. The consumption trial is to check what effect the weather has on fuel consumption and efficiency. I sent an officer inshore to get in touch with the agent, and the latter, Mr. Sangira of the Indian Medical Department, came on board to see me at 11:15. He himself had only been on the island a fortnight and was not expecting to visit. The only communication in the outer world for Nakri is a steamer from Port Blair twice a year and occasional trading vessels. Of course, the Royal Navy cruiser turning up. So basically, the Royal Navy cruiser is the empire in this part of the world. On Wednesday 29th, 2 aircraft were sent to search the southern half of the islands for Japanese fishing boats. One licensed one was seen in the Ritchie archipelago, and one showing no number or flag on the west coast. In the evening, we gave a party to the principal local officials and their wives, about 20 of us all told. Thursday, March 30th, our aircraft took up the deputy commissioner and a police officer, but did not see anything of interest, but showed them the capabilities of Royal Navy aircraft. On 15, the officer commanding troops, Major Spencer of the Northamptonshire Regiment, fixed up games and football every day for the men. Parties of officers and men were shown round the jail. Sailing races were organised by the local sailing club, the ship's crews, and using club boats. Now, you'll notice that there are soldiers aboard. Not Marines, there are soldiers aboard. Now, there are Marines aboard, but there are also soldiers aboard. Why? Why is HMS Manchester sailing around with an enhanced complement of soldiers? And remember, we talked about this earlier. Manchester is one of the Gloucesters. One of those ones with that larger crew. Well, a large chunk of that larger crew, as I said, can be extra soldiers. And this was because they were used for imperial policing. The entire class. Think about it. The Gloucesters are 3 ships. Liverpool, Manchester, Gloucester. What are the 3 ships in 4th Cruiser Squadron? Liverpool, Manchester, Gloucester. Where are they deployed? East Indies, where they wander round. They are often the only imperial presence there on these islands. So they need more troops. They need more sailors. Because when they turn up, they're everything. They are the one-stop shop. They are disaster relief. They are you really sure you feel like going independent? Look at all my guns, my aircraft, my very large, very fit gentlemen who, whilst they're playing football, doesn't it so cute, and cricket as well, could also be carrying a lot of bayonets your way. Are you really sure about this? So, it's an effective system. Institutional inertia meet the Mark 14 torpedo. Yeah, and as Thomas Van der Waals point out, I can testify for the receiving end, from 1943 onwards, the US does take over and takes over very aggressively. They hunt the wolf packs to extinction initially. They do. But again, the Admiral put in charge of it, interesting enough, does take Admiral Noble out for dinner. Because Noble writes home about it. So, Stromac, the reason, at least in my eyes, King didn't say we messed up with the convoy thing is the British would use it as ammunition to try to kill the early Pacific representative. Honestly, I don't think that was the case, because the British were never going to manage to kill the early Pacific offensive. It was too important to the American Senate. I think it's more a case of, if he admits that he's made a mistake, then we're on top of Pearl Harbor, he could well be looking at going, and who's going to replace him, because Nimitz is too busy. So think about the options. And alternatively, this is quite a big one as well. Again, look at it on top of Pearl Harbor. That would be admitting that the US and Navy has been doing a lot of errors whilst being in charge. They're going to get a lot of oversight, and that could slow down things, because if every decision is being double and treble checked by the political class, then a lot of decisions are going to take a lot of time. So I think that's one of the reasons why he pursues attack he does. Take care, King's Rook. Sure, Mac. To be fair to the king, Noble became head of the British delegation in November. By that time, things were starting to come under control. Noble was over there slightly early in November. He's put in officially in place in November, but he's already over there, I think, in October. They get him over there quite quickly. I think, from memory. Right. So, what else is going on? Well, you all know what is going on in 1939. There is the knuckle-bowed, the knuckleless-bowed town class cruiser is having her fun. Yes. HMS Birmingham is taking part in the Tsingtao incident, where HMS Birmingham will race at... Now, let's go back to this. HMS Birmingham is officially, according to this list, maximally capable of 32 knots. 7,700 nautical miles at 13 knots. Right? And as we all know, the sloop with her has a maximum speed of 20 knots. That's what she's maximum design speed of 20 knots. As you all know, again, from my previous talks on Tsingtao, they make the whole range and quite a considerable distance at a speed which would definitely seem to, considering how quickly they cover it from alerts to getting there, a fair bit faster. So, yeah. Very efficient hull design. That's what we'll say. Very efficient hull design. DM Carter. Admiral Stark was CNO at the time of Pearl. King was Sinclanked on 7th December 1941. Commander-in-Chief, Atlantic. As I said, it's not so much his decisions as the institution's decisions he's got to defend. So Pearl Harbor's happened, and he's ended up getting promoted. If he then admits that the US Navy hasn't prepared it, and remember, the Atlantic coast, which was his former area, it would have caused issues. How much water-based style was in the subclass? Quite a lot. Dove Squad, amazing how good the Iron Cruiser at rowing 10,000-ton cruisers. Yeah. Her and the sloop, well in excess of 20 knots for the whole way. Well in excess of 20 knots. To turn up when they did turn up. Because if you consider they are exercising in Indonesia, and they get all the way up to Tsingtao in Not very long. It's about a day and a half. In car, HMS Birmingham's bow form was never used on later ships of the class. No. There is a reason for this. Because they found the bow form is useful, but actually fixing the stern does better. Which is why the stern slowly evolve. And the knuckle is useful because whilst Birmingham does prove a more efficient hull design in terms of speed of movement, the others actually, with the knuckle, prove to be slightly more stable gun platforms. So it's swings and roundabouts. That's good. The clock. Admiral King probably also has about throwing his predecessor under the bus. That tends to be a good way of later fighting proverbial knives in your back. Oh yes, because the predecessor will have people who still follow him in his entourage, who were his promotions up, who will then take it out on you. Yeah. I would say if there is one admiral I find overblown in World War II, it is Donitz. I won't say why, but I do think he managed to write himself up with fairly good press after the war. He managed to produce many documents and things which say he was right before everyone else was, and I always worry about it when an officer. I can imagine an officer being right once or twice early. And there is something else. I talk about Henderson, and Henderson is right mostly because he's looking at the style of war Britain's going to fight, and he's working out what they need to fight it. So that is almost a more conceptually easier thing to do. But once you're fighting a war, to say, I'm going to predict how the war is going to be behaving in 6, 12, 18 months' time, in terms of operations and strategic circumstance, that's quite a big leap. Whereas being able to go, well, our scenarios we're going to be probably fighting worldwide, so these are the capabilities our ships are going to need. They're going to need endurance, they're going to need speed, in order for us to be able to move them around where we need them to fight and to do the things. That's... One is a logical progression. One is a amazing deduction. Nautical Wolf. Tsingtao is an event you point to signify what being brave, and I would go BM, but okay. And why you don't mess with the RN. Yeah, it's quite useful for that one. And the reason I haven't gone into Tsingtao much is because we've done all sorts of videos about Tsingtao, so I can go over that a lot of times. But it is quite a cool story. So, this is what happens by 1939. By 1939, in September 1939, 2nd Cruiser Squadron, the Home Humber Force, are made up of HMS Southampton and HMS Glasgow. 18th Cruiser Squadron are Newcastle, Sheffield, Edinburgh, and Belfast. The 4th Cruiser Squadron in the East Indies are still Manchester, Liverpool, and Gloucester, although as you can see, they get transferred around quite quickly. Gloucester will be transferred to in 1940. And then there's the 5th Cruiser Squadron, which is Birmingham. And then we look, by July 1940, where are they? And remember, I've talked about this before. The Royal Navy has a plan for fighting a war in the East and a plan for fighting the war in the West. And it's hoping it doesn't need to fight both at the same time, because having enough ships to cover all that ocean is freaking difficult. And its plan has always been, hopefully, to have Japan first, because Japan is actually the easier war for Britain to fight. Because, again, if we go back all the way to this, or back to this, you'll notice in the East, there is a lot of Japanese trade which can be impacted, but they're a long way from British trade. In the West, ouch! So, They've had to be drawn back, and you've now got Belfast sitting in Western Approaches Command. Belfast has been given to Western Approaches Command because her job is Western Approaches Command. She is basically the big enforcer for Western Approaches Command at this point. Birmingham, Southampton, Newcastle, Sheffield, Glasgow, Edinburgh, and Manchester are 18th Cruiser Squadron. A massive 7-ship unit whose job is twofold. They will provide the pickets for the North Atlantic, and they will provide the emergency response blocking force, along with some tribal class destroyers and whatever capital ships are available that should any German task force try and make it en masse into the Atlantic, they will then advance to engage the enemy to the utmost. And in the Mediterranean, they have Liverpool and Gloucester. Basically going around going, hello, we're here. Ian Carr, who was predecessor to Admiral King? Admiral Stark, I think, from memory. William Cox, Plan Z was meant to mature about 1946, yes. Constant, the only person who thought the country was prepared for war in World War II appears to be Hitler. No, I don't think even Hitler did. Hitler was a gambler. Okay? Hitler gambled that everyone else would keep backing down. They backed down over so many things prior to this. Why were they suddenly going to stand up? Why was Poland going to be the straw that broke the camel's back? He's done Anschluss. He's marched into the Rhine. He's done all sorts of things, and no one's responded. Why suddenly over Poland? He's taken over the Sudetenland and Czechoslovakia. It's just, yeah. And no one did anything. So he just kept gambling. And this is the trouble. When you're dealing with dictators, they do tend to turn into gamblers if they're given half a chance. And they will just, you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. Or rather, try and take 10 miles. Breckenhill. Mussolini thought that World War II was going to be very short. He enters in at the time he does because he doesn't want to not be involved in the war by the time the Germans have won it, because he thinks the Germans are going to take a swoop through France and then Britain will surrender. I don't think any of them have ever met Britain before. Scott, when you say the Japanese would struggle to get units into seas around the UK to harm trade, spotters in the Russian 2nd Pacific Squadron would profoundly disagree. Unfortunately for them, whereas in their worldview, the Japanese had the advantage of possibly getting British support. In a war between Britain and Japan, you could guarantee they wouldn't get British support. And they'd be having to go the long way round, because they would have to either go through the Panama Canal, which we doubt the Americans would allow them, so they have to go down via the Falklands, where there would be a task group waiting to go, hello! You came to see us! Quickest construction of an airfield known to mankind would have taken place. And other option is to fight through all the cruisers in... Again, go through back to this plan. This was the Royal Navy's plan for how to stop the Japanese getting anywhere near British trade. Huge chunk of cruisers in the middle. Huge chunk of cruisers spread out. Jack, did RN think about the possibility of small German ships like cruisers venturing the South North Atlantic without capital ships, or cruisers were there to shadow big ones and mess with the task force? Pretty much the latter. They didn't think the shorter, smaller cruisers had the range. In-car, HMS Sheffield was finished with stainless and steel fittings rather than brass, hence the name Old Shiny and Shiny Shaft. Why was this done? Was it because of success, and was it done to our other ships? It wasn't really done to other ships, although it probably has happened in late recent years because stainless steel is cheaper, but it's also because Sheffield was the steel production capital of the world in this time. We'll get into that in a bit. Britain wasn't even supposed to surrender. That's the whole point. Yeah, it was supposed to fall out of the war, though. Okay, so here we have the hunt for the Bismarck. And the town class do get heavily involved in this. As you can see from this list, you've got HMS Sheffield pictured there. Of course, she famously gets attacked. But you also have others other than Sheffield very, very involved. You have various cruiser squadrons with HMS Victorious. And you have HMS Edinburgh and all the others. Now, on this magnification, you couldn't see much, so I did this. So you can see the end of the Bismarck, exactly what is involved, but also you can see what are the ships currently up on near Iceland between the Faroe Island gap for major ships getting through. And you'll notice that they are Birmingham, Manchester, and Arethusa! Yes! They are, the gang is together. The gang is up there. Backed up by several merchant cruisers. And that's part of the watching forces. That's one of the things these ships can do. They are really good at staying on station, which is one of the reasons why they're loved so much. Also, let's look at the ones going in for the kill. Ooh, well, Edinburgh's getting involved quite heavily. Ramillies isn't getting as close as she wants to. You have the very, very nice Osprey 28. The absolute necessary. Are you trying to complete your bingo? Is that it? Is that why you want a Blackburn squared reference? They weren't employed from the town class. They even have points where they sighted Edinburgh and started firing at her. And who was firing at her was probably not the Germans. I don't know. Everything does get involved in the hunt for the Bismarck. And please do note, 4th DF and Perrin, that appear in the solid purple line. You can see what they're getting involved in. 4th DF, of course, being the tribal class. All of you who have Iron Brew, please do drink. I will do the necessary top-up. In-car, Renown wants to go to at Bismarck, but is ordered not to intervene. Yeah, there are so many ships ordered not to intervene. Pretty much, at a certain point, you have to look at the admirals in charge of the hunt for Bismarck and go, are you just there to spoil the rest of the Navy's fun? The glorious thunder of 4 capital ships could have been involved in the sinking of Bismarck. Bismarck's face, if it hadn't just been Rodney and King George V coming out of the darkness at them. Oh my god, what's the Royal Navy bought this way? Brangano, thank the gods Romney's wouldn't. I think by this point there wasn't much. With Nelson, no, with Rodney, King George V, if Ramleys and Renown had both managed to get there, if all the there wouldn't have been much chance. In a nice way, Bismarck would have been still firing at the one at the front, and they'd all been dodging. And now we have the Mediterranean. The battle. The slightly damaged Manchester is slightly damaged during this fight. The Battle of Cape Spartivento. And Spartivento is a fun battle which, frankly, neither side can really claim to win. It takes place in the 27th of November, 1940. So it's one of those battles which is often not talked about because you'll remember the traditional doctrine. Taranto wipes out enemy operations in the Mediterranean. However, what it does in this, actually, as I said, the realistic thing is it takes out a lot of their fuel, it takes out a lot of supplies, and forces them to operate from further north, which is one of the reasons you have Spartivento happen like it does, because actually a stronger Italian force is fighting a Royal Navy cruiser force, and they have to fall back because they are at the end of their logistics trail because of the issues they have. And so the Royal Navy ends up being able to push them back and succeed. It's considered a draw by many, but it does get the Royal Navy through. The Royal Navy get the convoy through, so I would say that's a win for the Royal Navy. For the Italians, it would have been stopping a convoy. And you also had this lovely, this quote from Lieutenant Commander Hugh G. Singer on the sinking of HMS Gloucester during the Battle of Crete. My first impression when I entered the water was that it was agreeably warm, but I soon found that water, which is pleasant for bathing, is not necessarily a suitable medium in which to spend a day and a night. That is such a British officer quote. I mean, seriously. And that's in the official report. That's in the official report. I don't know what to say. Joe Spray 28. I just did it because someone was celebrating the lack of BB mentions last stream, so I'm noting every streamer mentioning it. I can't say no to that. And I have to say, the super chats are very nice from everyone who does them because they do go into the Iron Brew Fund. Bracking Kennel, the Italians were escorting their own convoy. Yes, but their convoy doesn't get to North Africa, whereas the British convoy does get to where it's supposed to go. So, that's why I say victory for the British. Tovano, nobody here mentions one important factor, the USSR. We'll get into that another time, but that was an issue. Rising very fast and Hitler versus Stalin, two problem solved at once. The trouble was Poland was in the way. And technically, Poland was a free democracy, which they quite liked. But what does this mean? Ben Gregan, quick question. Oh, it's a rather appropriate question considering what the picture is just going. Question on Town Class Triple Turrets. Why was the middle gun, are they meant to be called guns or rifles? I've heard both. Barrels. Set back. Ergonomics for loading? Pretty much. It makes it slightly easier in terms of firing them and in terms of the positions in terms of for loading and for their mechanism and balancing it through the turret. If you'd had it further forward, you would have needed to make the turrets far, far wider rather than making them longer. And actually, it was easier to make them longer than wider. Ben Grogan, if so, why wasn't it adopted more widely on other vessels? Well, you have the Crown Colonies. Dirt Squad, that's just one I'm not answering. I don't have any favourite features of the Blackburn, although it was the one. If I was going for a thing which was good about it, it was the engine, which was being adopted by quite a lot of other aircraft of Fleet Air at the time, so that made logistics easier, and there's similarities between it and other aircraft, i.e. the Dart. Did make it logistically quite good, but aesthetically, nothing. Constant, it was the limit deflection in between firing gun barrels. That does... How do I put it? When you are talking about... When people are writing the history books, they focus on the deflection issue. When you're reading in the archives and you're looking at the constructor's report, they are less worried about the deflection issue and more worried about the design issue, because you want to make your cruiser hull long and thin so it's fast and cuts through the water, so as long and as thin as it can possibly be, so it will cut through the water. If you have to make the turrets an extra foot or foot and a half wider, which is what they were going, that equates to an extra 4 feet on the beam. Okay? So this thing, if you can save a foot and a half in your turret, you can save roughly 4 feet on your beam. This is from memory, so if I'm wrong, I do apologize, but it's from memory of reading the archive documents. So that matters. And it also, as you point out, has a bit of an extra benefit on the deflection. Yeah, that's cool. That's useful and makes your gun slightly more accurate. But honestly, that isn't as much of a problem for cruiser design as that extra beam, because if you've got to be wider, that means you've got to carry more deck armor, which means you either got to make it thinner or have it covering less percentage of the hull. You will probably need more belt armor because it'll be a slightly longer hull. It'll be a slower hull. There's all sorts of issues that come with it being wider. So making it longer and thinner, sort of better. That's good. I thought you might mention the ability to open Admiralty map fully. Well, let's be honest, the covered thing, that... Yeah, that's a good idea. That is a good thing. But mainly the logistics. Steve M. Hello, Steve M. I've heard it was also to avoid having the blast on the outer two guns affecting the dispersion of the center gun when all fired simultaneously. As said, that is another advantage, and is an advantage which historians tend to focus on. Again, and I'm not pointing out my profession or anything, but let's just do it. It's nothing bad about my profession or anything, but which sells books more? Talking about the firing of guns and deflection, because this is sexy and is involved in the actual mechanics of waging war, or the practicality of if your turret is wider, then your ship has to be wider, and that makes it slower. Let's be honest, the gun stuff is far sexier. It sells far more books. In car, ironically, for the turrets, the beam was increased on later subclasses. Yes. So this meant that in 1941, when the Far East happens, there are no town class available for it because they're all committed. HMS Belfast has been damaged. Ships have been sunk. We'll get into which ones. And so December 1941 happens. The pre-war plans, which, as I talked about, mostly involved with 4th Squadron, reinforcing 5th Squadron to defend Singapore by going offensive and doing commerce raiding and all sorts of things to draw away Japanese forces, can't happen. There aren't enough cruisers, and certainly not the right type of cruisers, to go commerce raiding and gird a course operations in the Far East in December 1941. This affects Force Z, of course, is deployed, and it doesn't have an aircraft carrier because of the aircraft carrier losses and the various damages that have been done in Crete, various other operations in the Mediterranean, where issues in covering them, the loss of Glorious, Courageous, Ark Royal. All these things have added up that the Royal Navy doesn't have enough cruisers, and definitely not in the right place for dealing with Japan because of the commitments of the war. It doesn't have enough aircraft carriers available to cover the forces. And what's interesting again is I honestly believe if an aircraft carrier had been deployed, as actually happens, when an aircraft carrier deploys, a town class cruiser shows up with it. And that's because the town class cruisers, again, because of their speed, were often considered very good assets to have around an aircraft carrier or operating with an aircraft carrier because A, they could do the counter surface radar operations using the aircraft carrier to provide them with the long range reconnaissance, although their own aircraft would also help that. But B, this is a big factor, they were able to keep up with the aircraft carrier, and they were able to keep up with the aircraft carrier for the range. Concept. What sort of ballistic differences were there between the different countries, 6 and 8-inch guns? 8-inch always has more penetrative power and longer range. But only works if you can see that far. And one of the interesting things of the Royal Navy, the reason they end up focusing on a 6-inch gun, is because they're looking at what are the likely ranges of engagement. And they decide that actually having more 6-inch guns is better than having the 8-inch guns, because whilst the 8-inch guns give you longer range, the 6-inch guns with their greater firepower are roughly similar penetrative capabilities at the ranges that you're likely to be engaging at. It's similar enough that if you've got enough more shots, you're going to cause a lot more damage. So, town class cruisers. Southamptons. You might have seen this has already been divided up with an idea to the Long Patrol, which is going to come out about this. The Long Patrol will probably replace the brew ships coming out. I'm going to have to reconfigure brew ships a bit, so I will this will replace one of the brew ships coming up. Not this week's, but the one currently scheduled for next week will be moved to this week, I think, and because it's going to be in the new books. And then I'll move this one to the following week, to the week after that, and town class cruisers will come in. William Cox, maintaining speed in a seaway begins with cruisers. DDs have more trouble escorting carriers in rough weather. These, yep. Greg Southey. Elsewhere on YouTube, there is a video of a radio-controlled scale Blackburn. That's worrying. Shulmac, 8 inches are better for punching up size, and 6 inches are better for punching down. 8 inches aren't going to punch up much. And 6 inches will punch out most cruisers. So it's equals and downs. This is HMS Southampton, and this picture has actually got me into trouble today, because when I saw this picture, I said, ooh, that's gorgeous. And at the time, I was on the phone to my girlfriend, so almost got me into trouble. Thankfully, my girlfriend is very, very kind and understanding. and doesn't mind that I call both her and ships gorgeous. She's lost on the 11th of January 1941 off Malta. She's built by John Brown Company in Clydebank, and she's laid down on 21st of November 1934. She's ordered in 1933, i.e. the year that Henderson takes over as Third Sea Lord. She's launched in 1936, and she's commissioned in 1937. Battle honours. Well, here's the interesting thing. For World War II, she achieves Norway, Spartivento, and Malta. That's a fairly decent haul. You know, that's a fairly decent haul considering when she gets sunk. But you're going to. I'm going to answer the point. I was asked earlier, what is the name I really want brought back for a town class? And, well, there is one name I feel is conspicuous in its absence. From the Type 26. Steve M., I'm sure once she knew it was one of the town class, she understood. I'm hoping she's watching this and will accept it. Vision, I'm back. Had to drive to garage on the other side of town for brief dry docking for taillight. Southampton is a very nice looking lady. She is a very good looking ship, and it's rather wrong. But I am glad to see that, well, no, I'm actually slightly annoyed to see. I'm glad by some of the names picked for the Type 26s, but I think there are some names which are noticeable by their absence. And I have the feeling it's been called the City class because HMS London's been included in it. HMS Newcastle. Scrapped at Fez Lane 1959. This is a really cool photo. I'm going to expand this of HMS Newcastle. Laid down 1930, ordered again in 1933, laid down 1934, launched 36, commissioned 37, decommissioned 58. So it serves 21 years. And you can see the 4-inch guns, the mounts being fired. Now, you always had a difference between a mount and a turret. When a historian uses the phrase mount, we mean something which is open in some way. A turret is an enclosed protection for firing guns. A mount is something which is open. The reason why the Navy still has mounts in this period is because the Royal Navy does a lot of study. And whilst turrets look good, if you're building a ship which theoretically, and I've already mentioned my iffiness over whether or not the town class actually met the treaty limits, honestly, considering the water-based armor and various other things they seem to have. The 4-inch guns, the amount of armor the amount of protection you could give if you were routing a turret within that limit would not be enough to protect the crew. It wouldn't be enough to protect anyone firing that gun, and it would also give you a far greater reduction in space. Whereas if you have a mount and you have a far thicker shield, you have them protection pointing towards the area of enemy engagement, and you have more space to move. And also, here's the thing. If you have a turret which is going to offer no protection, the shell comes inside, you're in an enclosed space, you kill everyone. If you have a shield, like a mount, it comes in, boom. There's actually a lot of space. So you can duck away and you've got a far higher chance of surviving in that kind of environment. Crowbar 79, if you have HMS Southampton, it wouldn't be able to use the Portsmouth Naval Base without upsetting locals. And they could survive. Now is HMS Sheffield. Okay. Again, very glad to see that returning in the Type 26. And this is, of course, her with her guns out after she sunk a German tanker, the Friedrich Brehm. As I would point out, these ships go around the world basically going, "Hello, Mr. German merchant ship, how are you doing today?" Or, "Hello, Mr. Italian merchant ship, are you feeling well?" "You aren't, let me fix it." "Do you like to become British?" "No." "Well, then I'll fix your problems for you permanently. How about a nice rest on a lovely bed?" The seabed! Laid down, built by Vickers Armstrong in Newcastle, I think. Laid down 31st of January 1935, ordered in 1934, launched in 1936, and commissioned in 37. Scrapped at Faslane in 1967. Derp Squad. I'm sure the designers of the tank class made sure they followed the letter of the treaties exactly. The spirit was optional. The very precise letter of the treaties. Vision. When the USN go from gunhouse to turret for describing unarmored turrets? I'm not quite sure. They suddenly do, though. In car, were the water-based bulges sealed or somehow open to the sea? They were sealed, but they could pump water in and out. A 4-inch DP crew must also be worried by strafing aircraft. Yeah, but technically they're going to be pointing their guns at them because that gun is the 4-inch guns are the high angle mount. So in this one, as you can see, if you look at the this action, they are being used to shell the North Korean gun batteries, but that's because they haven't had any aircraft to deal with in ages. This is HMS Glasgow. He's got King George VI aboard in this picture. Always a nice picture to have. From his visit to the fleet in 1943 at Scapa Flow. And again, ordered in 34, built by Scott Shipbuilding and Engineering Company, launched June 1936, commissioned 1937, decommissioned November 1956, and scrapped up live 4 years later. Norway, Arctic, Biscay, and Normandy. Does well. And now we have the knuckleless Southamptons. We have HMS Birmingham. Now, please note, Glasgow and Birmingham, both included in the Type 26s. Norway, Korea, this one gets up to... This is a picture of Field Marshal Montgomery saluting her and her Royal Marine Guards in Copenhagen. She's built in Devonport Dockyard, Plymouth. Ordered 34, launched 36, laid down 35, launched 36, and commissioned 37. She is scrapped at Inverkeithing in 1960. She's another nice ship, but she's, of course, the one involved in Tsingtao. Derp Scott, if you filled voids in a ship with helium, would it reduce the placement and purpose of treaties? Probably. Would it be enough to make it a big difference? I'm not sure. Steve M. I always wondered what, if any, difference there was between gunhouse and turret. Sounds like they're essentially the same. The turret tends to actually have armor. Gunhouse is basically shrapnel which you provide to the enemy. The Gloucesters. HMS Liverpool! She looks cute in this picture. Built by Fairfield Shipbuilding and Engineering Company in Govan. Laid down, ordered in 1935, laid down 36, launched 37, commissioned 38, decommissioned in 52. The Town class had extended careers where mention is often made that ships were worn out by war. The thing is, the Town class, unlike the Didos, were actually quite cheap and easy to refit post-World War II and keep going. So they did keep going. and you were getting rid of the counties, you were getting rid of the crown colonies. Didn't really last that long. The town class were pretty important, and they were one of the answers the Royal Navy had in their bag to deal with the Svoldols if they looked annoying. And they did all sorts of good stuff in Korea. HMS Manchester. This is a picture actually taken during Operation Pedestal on the 11th of August 1942. And she is the vessel at the right of the screen. She would, of course, be sunk on the 13th of August 1942. She'd be scuttled. Builder is Hawthorne Leslie in Hebburn. Laid down ordered in 1935, laid down 1936, launched 37, commissioned 38. Battle honours: Norway, Spartavento, Malta, and Arctic. And again, isn't part of the Type 26 class at the moment, but I think, frankly, an HMS Manchester should be. But she's not the one I really am annoyed over, in terms of being included from the point of view of battle honours. Meet HMS Gloucester. Built at Devonport Dockyard. Laid down 22nd of September 1936. Launched 19th October 1937. Completed 31st of January 1939. Battle honours. Well, let's start off with them. Lowestoft in 1665. 4 Days Battle 1666. Orfordus 1666. Solbay 1672. Scovel 1673. Battle of Texel 1673. Maribel 1705. Ushant 1747. Jutland 1916. Calibri 1940. Matapan 1941. Crete 1941. Malta Convoys 1941. Mediterranean 1941. Kuwait 1991. She was lost off Crete, and this is a picture of her sinking, courtesy of a German airman. I think the fact that there is no HMS Gloucester in the current Type 26 roster is a massive oversight, because this is actually, if you go from cumulative battle honours, there are not many ships in the Royal Navy which have more than this. And if we did have a 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th Type 26s, or even just a 9th, and I would like to see a 9th at least, I would say HMS Gloucester is a must because of her battle honours, because of her history of a name. But again, she adds up to the ones which are sunk prior to December 1941. Callum Gaspard, if we want to be picky, shrapnel fragment splinters are as different as gun houses and turrets, but I'm not picky. You see, I tend to use shrapnel to cover pretty much anything which is turned into metal bits which are flying around, but when you're inside a turret, as a sort of catch-all, because most people tend to understand it. But you are right. Fragments and splinters is technically what the turret is turned into. Ian Carr, can't HMS Newcastle be an Australian HMS Newcastle be an Australian Type 26? Well, I think they could have HMS Newcastle if they wanted. Trent McCartney, Gloucester's descendant is the escort that shot down the anti-ship missile fired at Missouri in Gulf War 1. Yes. Perfect. She has many claims to fame. Builder. Now it's the Edinburghs. We have Edinburgh, which of course was actually lost carrying a lot of gold. But HMS Edinburgh, this is a picture of her with 2 Dido-class vessels, a Hermione and Euryalus, during Operation Halberd. Built by Swan Hunter, Tyne and Weir. Life laid down on the 30th of December 1936. Ordered in 1935. Launched 1938 and commissioned 1939. A nice ship. A good ship. And finally, HMS Belfast. Been a museum ship since 1971. This is her lovely, lovely walrus. Builder Harland Wolff Shipyard, Belfast, appropriately enough. Laid down 10th of December 1936, launched 1938. She'd also been ordered in 1935, completed in 1939, commissioned 1939, decommissioned 1963. So 8 years passed between her decommissioning and her being turned into a museum ship. Battle honours, Arctic, North Cape, Normandy, and Korea. Now, here is the thing. And this is the reason I am sort of annoyed with some of the choices made for the Type 26. Because if you go through the battle honours, this is one of the least battle honours available. And she's still existing. She's a very famous ship. I would argue Belfast's name has been chosen for a Type 26 because of HMS Belfast. And we'll get into the legacy in a bit. The actual fact that she still exists from World War II and there's this legacy ship. But battle honor wise, Edinburgh is there, frankly, and I don't mind that. Gloucester isn't. Manchester isn't. And Manchester has more battle honours than Belfast has. Liverpool isn't. And again, more battle honours. Birmingham is. Glasgow is. Sheffield is. Newcastle is. Southampton isn't. So by my count, we have Southampton, Gloucester, Liverpool, three which certainly should be there. But they aren't. So, legacy time. And before I get into this, as you all know, this is second bottle, so I'll be back in a second. Ooh. And we have HMS Victorious being talked about. Ooh. Catalina is a far more worthy aircraft than the Walrus? Why? Walrus is cute.
And they operated from cruisers, so they're cool. And it is Supermarine, so that's basically a Spitfire, especially if you're Germans in Norway. We do an HMS Victorious or an HMS Victory. Yeah, we did manage to get away. That was how they got round it. They had Victorious rather than Victory as a name. So, any questions? Oh, I should probably start in the legacy. So, what is the legacy of the tribal class? What is the legacy of the town class? Sorry, brain auto writing there. It's been one of those days. As I said, reading through book and making sure it's all perfectly organized. Let's see. YouTube have had an update. That would explain why I was having issues earlier. They've decided to go to uploads, lives, and content. All right. So let's make that a little bit smaller. Let's start answering questions. Legacy of the town class is one of those interesting topics. The town class cruisers are the ultimate presence ship. Let's be honest. They've got treble 6-inch guns, which, if you're a naval officer, you're going to go 18-inch, have more power, da 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 da. Although, if you're a smart naval officer, you will understand those 12 6-inch guns is going to be a lot of firepower coming your way. But you're going to think 8-inch, my 18-inch battleship, all these things. I don't need to worry about 6-inch cruisers. But if you're a politician, that's a lot of barrels. That's a very big hunk of metal. And that is a lot of presence. And if we go further than that, and we'd have a look at the plan again, there is a lot of space built into this ship. You can have excellent parties on the stern, on the bow, on the awnings. You have lots of space built into the design, lots of mess areas, lots of spaces you can have. You can host dinners. Lots of spaces you can have guests to visit. That's a great thing for presence. And then on top of this, you have the amount of troops they can carry, the amount of personnel they can carry. They are peacetime presence ships, but they're the big presence ships. The idea was that you would have maybe a tribal class, maybe an Arafusa, a sloop, or something smaller pottling around, and that would be your regular appearer. But every station would have one or two of these. And they would turn up and go, "Hello, sir. Have you been treating my little buddies well? Because if you haven't, look at me. I mean, look at me. Am I not gorgeous? You know, my beauty, my sleek lines hides a very, very steely punch. Behave. Now, would you like some tea?" Basically, they are... How do I put this? They're the tiger mums of the cruiser world. You know, that whole idea that you have in this world. You have these mums who will go in and fight any battle for their children, anything, you know. That's what they're there for. The sloops go round and presents. Hello! We're here. We're showing the flag. The smaller cruisers go around and show the presents. We're here. Tsingtao. Tiger Mum, HMS Birmingham. Straight in. You will be handing back my merchant ship. My merchant ship. Doesn't matter whether the thing's done anything wrong or not. Tiger Mum won't never accept that it's done a mistake. It's the same with a town class. That is their thing. They are the ultimate presence. But also in wartime, they are very flexible assets. Sure, Mac, it seems quite large for 10,000 tons and really makes you wonder. Well, again, we go back to the stats, and you'll notice that the standard displacement of an Edinburgh is listed as 10,500 tons, and their normal full load is 13,000 tons. That's a large hunk of metal. That's a large ship. Let's be honest. And the thing is, they're possibly the only 6-inch cruiser which has, for treaty era armor which is going to be effective at dealing with other 6-inch cruisers' guns. They are anti-surface radar because, let's be honest, most surface raiders are not Graf Spey. Most surface raiders are converted merchant ships which are going to have a maximum of 6-inch gun. Although any surface raider which comes up against this thing does not have fun. I know there is the Cormoran Sydney incident, which is an example of how it can go wrong, but every other example of a surface raider getting close and personal with a Royal Navy 6-inch cruiser is not a good experience for them, and the few which came up against Town class went very quickly awry. Colin's dad. Is that 10,000 tons loaded or unloaded combat weight? It's unloaded. Remember, it's 10,000 tons standard displacement, so it doesn't count all sorts of things. Crancer Jones. I mean, why not call more ships cruisers? I mean, Tiburon class is not that different in size with the Ali Buck. I would argue the Ticos aren't cruisers. I would argue they are called cruisers because of the Aegis system and because someone wants to make a big fuss about having them because the Russians have cruisers. The Ticos are destroyer leaders, if that. And they're actually on the same hull as the Spruances, I think, from memory. Constant, every time I hear the phrase Daka Daka, Carmen, sad I missed so much because of work. Don't worry, you can always watch it through. And there will be, as I said, there is going to be a significant amount of long patrols produced from this to cover a Sunday, which I've now got something come up on. In Car, why move on from towns to Crown Colony class, which were similar, when for morale and ships to adopt, other UK cities could have gotten an act, e.g. Bristol Gutter? Well, there's two reasons. One, you're going to produce a different class, which is a stripped down town that is that is designed to be built as quickly as you can physically start churning out a heavy 6-gun cruiser. And two, whilst for morale, more towns are certainly viable, for political reasons in terms of managing the Commonwealth and the Empire, it's rather like the tribal class. There is a reason the colonies that are picked for the Crown Colonies are picked, and there is a reason the tribes are picked for the tribal class, and it is entirely politics. It is entirely to try and make sure those groups feel as associated with the war effort and the Empire as possible. I think Sean Mack's doing Sean Mack is doing a lovely job tonight as the chat administrator. So I want to say thank you to him while he's doing it. Saves me worrying about it. Hello, Doctor. Hello, Carl Harmon. Let's see. Wilmcox, the Sprints class hull that had a Tickeronga cruiser subclass and the Kid surface optimized subclass. A very useful hull. Yeah, but honestly, if you're going to build a cruiser, you want a slightly different hull than the Sprints. It was done for cheap. Not at once. Constant. Both classes have different weapon systems and suite and different role. Whereas the class in the areas Command Air Sports CV to an extent, yes. Basically, the idea is the Aegis system of the TCOs gives them a command role, so they're cruisers. I haven't finished build trumps, but did my question about reliability get answered? Potentially. There are various options. There are various options for that. I think eventually build trumps is going to do a dig in it. Interest for Dr. Locke. What is your opinion of the Type 42 destroyer? My opinion of the Type 42 destroyer is best summed up in a single picture. Let me just grab that picture. I was reminded of it the other day by Drac. Okay, let's see if that's working. I have no idea why it's dropped down the frame rate and it's made it smaller. I do apologize. I don't know why. Oh, well. I'm going to have a long conversation at some point with the lovely people at XSplit. A long conversation. But anyway, the picture which describes my entire view of the Type 42. Can be summed up this way. Can you see a little Type 42 at the end? Then there are the 4 Type 45s. That 42 is a puppet. Type 42 is an air defense frigate in so many ways. So that's my advice. That's my thing for the Type 42. They are teeny, and yeah, they are built to satisfy something. I'm not sure what, but it's not the air defense. They do air defense at sea well, but they're not really. They should have been about another 2,000 tons to really be effective. Should there be an HMS Cardiff, do you think, from Carl Harmon? Yes. That would be one of my thoughts. Basically, as I said earlier, I think I'd like Gloucester, Liverpool. If I go through the list again. I would like Gloucester, Liverpool, and Southampton. And I think Cardiff would be a very good one, a very sensible one as well. Vision, what would a modern cruiser design entail? Over what modern destroyer frigates have to? Armor, marine detachment, more boats and helicopters, multifunction rooms for diplomacy? All of that, probably, but he'd probably also be looking at something in the region of about 12 to 15,000 tons. At least, maybe more. A modern cruiser would be a very high status unit because it would have to fulfill the command role. King's Rook. So around a thought I had the other day. Cruisers are general purpose, high endurance presence. The CCG operates several ships classified as high endurance multi-presence icebreakers. They use them for presence in the science civilian cruisers? They could well be classified as a former cruiser, certainly. Anonymous. Yes, as the tribals, there is one called Cossack. There's also another one called Eskimo and one called Tartar. There are lots of ones there which are not exact, and Nubian, which doesn't exist. So some of them are traditional names for Royal Navy, and some of them have the advantage of trolling the Soviet Union. So, you know, there is a mixture going on there. We are back. Yes, we are back. It's been running at 480 for a while. I'm not sure why. John Shade, Type 42 looks like a Corvette compared to Type 45. Type 45s are destroyers. So they are destroyers, and they really are destroyer size. Type 45s are massive in comparison to the 42s. There is like a whole world of difference between them. Nutty Happy One. King, you have to think how cheap our navy has become. Canada don't spend money on the navy. If you think it would be, if you think we do build the old 15 Type 26 cover, I wouldn't be surprised if Canada does build all 15 Type 26s, but I wouldn't be surprised if they moan about it the whole way through, and if there's lots of painful cuts along the way to pay for them. But the fact is, there's the whole reason. Why is the Royal Navy suddenly announced the next Type 32 frigate? Why are they ramping up the Type 31? Why are there heavy leavings that there's going to be more Type 31s and more Type 32s than just a run of 5? Because of what's going on in the world. And the reason the Canadians will probably get 15 Type 26s, because global warming means that Canada's got a northern route to deal with and all sorts of Arctic issues. They need the ships. You don't have send us a population. You need the presence of the surface ships. The Wolf class are good. They're great, but you also need those frigates. Car Harmon, just be satisfied if you get HMS Dragon you've got at the moment, and as I said, I would quite happily support HMS Cardiff for another Type 26. I think there should be 4 more Type 26s. I think you should be looking at about 12 Type 26s, at least 6 Type 31s, and at least 6 Type 32s, if the 32s are what they think they're going to be. We need. I was reading a very interesting report today, which is basically someone going, "Oh, you don't need this, you don't need that," and I'm sitting there going, "Do you understand strategic depth at all?" No. There are lots of people in this world who will tell you that you can either rely on others to defend your stuff if you're a medium power, and so you don't have to spend money on that, or that defense beginning at home means you only need stuff to stand on the beaches. You don't. If you consider the effect on the British economy of Somalian piracy, of the incidents in the Straits of Hormuz, neither of those could have been solved by the Royal Navy relying on everyone else to go, because it wouldn't have solved the image and the confidence back in the British banking district, the insurance district, London. You need to start. A lot of banking and a lot of finance is based on confidence. And therefore, if a government acts with confidence, it tends to do quite well. Especially if it can give the banking finance industry an idea, it has a long-term view and it has policies in place and it's going to be fairly stable. Defense is an insurance for that. And those ships forward-based are going to be insurance. Thank you, Samuel Thompson. That's very kind of you. It's very kind of you. I've never seen a fan one before, so thank you. When did the RN start the type for class designation? It comes in pretty much after World War II, and it's when they're starting to work things out and work things into. Slowly, they're sorting out frigates. They become, especially in the destroyers converted into frigates. It starts to become a type series, and you work out what the different types are for. And you've now got the Royal Navy's divided into anything with a 2 in front of it is an anti-submarine warfare frigate. Everything with a 3 in front of it is a general purpose frigate. Everything with a 4 in front of it is a destroyer. Anything with an 8 in front of it is a large destroyer, aka a cruiser, probably, in all but name. Hence Bristol. Iron Card, did iron ships have bright paintwork painted out during wartime? Yes, but they had paintwork like this, which isn't exactly dark either. King Shrimp, we need about 9 subs, 6 Devils, 6 Type 26, and 12 Icebreaking Destroyers with a range of... I don't think. I think in nicest way, the ice-breaking destroyers is a lovely idea, but that is not going to do anti-submarine warfare work. And for the Canadian Navy, ASW is going to be critical. I would agree with the increased subs. I would agree with more the Wolves, and I'd say keep the Type 26s. They're going to have enough of an air defense capability. You don't need the destroyers. The difference between a destroyer and frigate these days is not really size or range or anything like that. The difference between a destroyer and a frigate is whether they're orientated around anti-submarine warfare in their hull design or air defense in their hull design. And I would say for Canada, the anti-submarine warfare makes more sense because if you're operating anywhere further than you've got range for your F-18s, for whatever air defenses you have ashore, flying onshore, you're going to be in a task group with other powers. What can you offer them? Well, if you're talking about Britain and America, you turn up with an air defense destroyer. That's nice. It's useful. Air anti-submarine warfare frigate. That's useful because you need a lot more of them per task group. You do. And it's quite honestly, it's because with submarines you need to often do a deterrence with the ship. The ship often it's a pet hunting in pair, whereas an air defense destroyer can be a picket solo, or have an ASW frigate with it as its backup. You know, if you're gonna have extra air defense destroyers, they get spread out to other places solo. Khan, my ideal fleet: 2 amphib ships, helicopter carriers, 2 carriers, 8 Type 45, 9 to 12 Type 26, 8 Type 31, and 8 Type 32. Yes, I'm greening. No, I'm not, sorry. I would say that's an okay idea, but I would say have your third LHD, have 3 LHDs with ski ramps on. Because if you've got 5 flight decks and 3 docks, you can guarantee the availability of at least 1 dock and at least 2 flight decks at all times. And you can actually guarantee 2 flight decks available and at least 1. Whereas if you get 4 ships, you can't. Tom Van Orn, thank you. I have a great lag in the dramatis. Don't worry, we all do. Sometimes, how much friction do you anticipate between USA and Canada, considering US approach to flexing muscle over freedom of seas? The thing is, at the moment, Canada's okay with doing it in a relaxed way. I have a feeling with the rate of Russian pushing into the Arctic and pushing really, really quite hard on Canada, I wouldn't be surprised if Canada ends up finding itself forced to either roll over to Russia, which they won't want to do, or having to be more assertive. And the one thing I would always say about the Canadians is they're incredibly polite and they don't want to, they often are abroad, they want to talk, they want to do things in a very, what you would say, grown up manner, civilized manner. But you then look at their track record and it gets to a certain point, you push them and then they go, phoom. And so if I was the Russians, I'd be very careful because you can look at the Canadians and go, we can keep pushing them, we can keep pushing them. They'll just keep talking. They won't do anything. And it'll get to a point and the Canadians will correct. And I see that in their orders for the Wolves. I see that in their orders for Type 26s. They are starting to think about the need to correct. Peter Davison, Type 81s were tribal class frigates. There was an argument over whether they were 81s or 82. They were 81s. The 8 was used for them, but it was because they were general purpose assets. Do you know one of them? Canadians don't want to fight. We want to be friendly with me. The instant you go after us, though, we rip and tear until it's done. Pretty much. That's the thing. Sort of. I love the Canadians because, and this is speaking as someone who has quite a lot of friends and relatives who are Canadian. They are some of the nicest people. If you follow Sam McLean on Twitter, he works with me. I do a lot of work with him because he's the editor-in-chief of Global Maritime History. He is one of the nicest people you'll meet. He and I actually have very different political views, but he is one of the nicest people you will ever meet. But there is a core of steel there, and you push him, and he will push back. And it's one of the things is that we work quite well together because we both prefer to be polite and work things out rather than have But that doesn't mean we won't push back if we're pushed. As people find out of us, and because he's Canadian, he gets it more than me. I'm British, so we're presumed to be polite, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to back down the whole time. It just meant we'll say sorry, but we won't really mean it. For the British, sorry is basically another version of Sorry. Sorry. It's basically another version of, what's going on here? Sorry. People think we're apologizing. We're not. We're basically doing the very polite version of, excuse me. Hello, Night Henry Productions. Dutchman, it must be 40 years ago that I visited HMS Belfast. They are cool. The thing I would point out with Belfast and Edinburgh is they really are designed for the Far East. Once you start looking through their stats, which is really the case here. Once again, using my MJ Whitley Cruisers of World War II book, because the Friedman one and I have disagreements over the town class. Quite dramatic ones. And you sit there and go, okay, so it's got a maximum range. It can carry 2,260 tons of oil, and it's got a maximum range of 8,000 nautical miles at 14 knots. That's fairly decent. Even for today's standards, that would be quite decent. Admittedly, for that much of oil, we'd expect it to go much further, but today's standards, or faster. And HMS Belfast is well worth a visit. Read Eric Thompson's No Honor in Death after it arrived Wednesday, and read chapter with boarding action before starting from beginning. And now up to page 6. Good read so far. Thanks for reviewing. It's cool. I've got another book, a series of books. I think Eric Thompson again, which I can recommend. I'm having quite fun with. I just got and I've read through them all. I've literally galloped through the lot over the last couple of days. Yeah. Ashes of Empire series is fairly decent. It's got some good cruiser work in it. Good storylines. Lots of references to historians in it. Lots and lots of historians. And how sarcastic and cynical we can be. Night Happy One. If you were Canada and money was an issue, what would you have in Canada Navy now? Probably a lot more Halifaxes and about 3 LHDs. Plus, I would have my group based around each LHD. Actually, no, probably 4 LHDs. So I could have 2 theoretically based on each coast, but I only have 1 in massive refit at any time. And I could therefore theoretically, if I need to, send one down to the Panama Canal and round if I had to. And I would have about 4 supply ships, and I would have sort of 2 equal squadrons based on the west coast and the east coast, each of roughly 8 frigates, 8 patrol ships, a couple of supply ships, and a couple of LHDs. And that would be my forces, and I would have a base. If I had money wasn't an issue, and I'd have probably F-35Bs to fly off them. Again, if money was an issue, but if money is an issue, then you can't have that, and you have to start being more sensible. Gino 191. Brits are polite until they are drunk in the sailors' bar, for example. Just ask Bismarck. I was thinking more about the Battle of Seas. That was quite largely probably fought drunk by some of the accounts. Oh. Ooh, a modern day Belfast. Gino 191. If you were doing a modern day Belfast, it would be about 15 to 16,000 tons. It would not be a light beast at all. Connor said, Canada gets literally zero love for the fact they have some of the best special forces in the units in the world. Because they're Canadian special forces. It sounds completely wrong. They're really good, but it does sound completely wrong. Matthew Selgar, do you think Canada would have made good use of the Russian Mistrals that were sent to Egypt? Yes, but I don't think they'd have wanted them because of the technology mix. The Canadians are very Western technology focused. Trying to absorb the Russian Mistrals would have been incredibly difficult. And honestly, the Mistral is a bit small for what the Canadians need. Because you see, the Mistral is a very good ship if you're talking about operating the Mediterranean or in the limited capacity the French would use it. If you're talking about operating the North Atlantic or the very, very nasty waters of the high north or the northern Pacific, you'd want something bigger. Probably Canberra-sized, maybe a little larger. Slightly less boxy, perhaps. Ian Carr, all our own in the tropical Far East World War II would have been extremely comfortable. No air conditioning. No, they had fans, they kept the windows open, and they were just wearing shorts. If they're wearing clothes at all. There are some stories about people in fire control systems and director boxes that are fun to read. Thomas Vanderbilt. Cynical historians. Is there a historian that doesn't become cynical over the years? Can you study history and be non-cynical? I think it's possibly an impossibility. King's Road. That's that works for normal blue oceans, but not Arctic, unless everything you list is also iceberg. Having 3 oceans to protect sucks when they are different types. Well, the thing is, I would probably have a northern base with a load of icebreakers based on it, which would have a suitable weapons fit. But I'm still not quite sure. There isn't really design off the shelf I could start quoting for that. And I would love them to be. Again, if you have unlimitless money, you would want them to be nuclear powered icebreakers. Simply because if you're going to be that far away, you want them to be as supply independent as possible. So you really want them to be nuclear powered. Carl Harmon, free ski jump, equipped LHDs. Remember what I said. If you have 5, you can guarantee. If you have 5 flight decks, you can guarantee the availability of 2. And 3 docks, you can guarantee the availability of 1. Pretty much. There is a reason why we have 4 SSBNs to guarantee 1 on patrol. Basically means you have 2 available. 1 on patrol, 1 available to be deployed out if it needs to be. If you have 4 boats. So you have 5, you can guarantee 2. Guarantee it. And you need to that because you need 1 for a strike carrier / air defense carrier role, 1 for the amphibious carrier role. Honestly, if you're doing it properly. I know what has been said about the Queen Elizabeth class. And if you do have both available, that'll be excellent. I'd prefer not to use 1 as an LHP because it's LPH because it's rather large. But because it's large, it can carry a significant quantity of helicopters and launch them in a significant manner. I think there was a picture recently which had 13 spots filled, and people going, I'm not sure if there are actually 13 spots. Yes, there are. Look at that on the deck. Ben Grogan, if not the Canadians, how about the Aussie Mistral requisition as an idea? The Aussies have the Canberras. They're fine. They could do with another one. But, those who do not know history are doomed to repeat it. Those who know history are doomed to watch those who do not know history as they're doomed to repeat it. Yeah. Tom Fennell, Hungary is one of the weirdest countries in terms of official history. Lately, their president just rewrites history. So he goes, politicians are always trying to reinvent history. Just don't listen to the politicians. The moment they say they know history, avoid it. Unless they do actually have a degree in history and are actually following through on it. Kahaman, Dream RN fleet, unlimited manpower, unlimited budget. Ooh. Lots of ships. Lots of ships. Right then. I'm going to say, because I'm hearing from a rather fluffy gentleman downstairs that he would like to go for a wander. So I am going to say thank you very much, and I'm going to do last questions, and I will go on for, let's see, about another 10 minutes. Samuel Thompson, in 1st September 1959, alternative Kriegsmarine has 0 heavy cruisers or larger, as all those resources went into U-boats. What chance would they have had versus RN, all in U-boats? If the Kriegsmarine have gone all in on U-boats, and therefore haven't followed treaty but have been all building U-boats, then expect the Royal Navy to have been ramping up sloop production, which they could have done quite happily without affecting any treaties, since about 1936. They'd have probably been churning out 20 or so sloops a year and would have had the corvettes ready to go. So would have been ordering Flower class the moment, they as soon as they did, if not sooner. So, yeah. And the thing is, it takes longer to get a submarine ready for service than it does a surface ship, especially when you have the large number of reserves the RN has who have experience. So they get mobilizing anti-submarine trawlers, all these things. Expect the RN to be even more focused. And what also happens is if the Germans have nothing bigger than a destroyer, Norway probably doesn't happen because they have none of the fire support. And the Royal Navy doesn't have to worry about that. The Royal Navy doesn't lose probably its aircraft carriers as much. Well, definitely not the ones lost to Channels and Gneisenau. It also that frees up aircraft carriers to go operate elsewhere in the world. So that means you probably have a larger carrier strike at Taranto on the Italians. You probably have at least 2 carriers involved in that. In which case, that would be a lot more damage done to the Italian Navy at Taranto than was done. Because if you double the number of swordfish involved, and considering the number of hits they strike the got, I think that would have been very problematic for the Italians, especially as they'd all been alone on the same night and would have had the same effects affecting them as affecting others, as affecting subsequent strikes. Because I think it would have been divided around 3 waves. And you'd have then probably had a far larger Force Z, a far larger Eastern Fleet built up, because they wouldn't have had to have them. It's basically, if you do that, you free up the Royal Navy's battleships and free up the Royal Navy's aircraft carriers to not worry about the Atlantic. You don't have the Battle of the River Plate because you don't have the Graf Spee. You don't have Deutschland as a threat. You don't have any of these things as a threat, which tie up a huge amount of Royal Navy resources. You also the fact that when you're talking about convoy protection, they can focus in on the submarine threat and the air threat. So instead of them having to worry about surface threat and having to find fuel and having to keep battleships and heavy cruisers out operational for things, they just can concentrate on mass producing anti-submarine warfare vessels and turning the V&W into it. So you actually make it far easier for the RN if you focus on just one thing. It's the old scenario. If you give the RN just one, if you give your opponent just one threat axis they have to worry about, it makes their job a lot easier to counter. So, thank you, Ian Carr. Thank you, King's Rook. Thank you, Colin's dad, Erican. I got Churchill's Hitcher 102 from my grandfather. Ooh, that is a good read. Thank you, Juno190. Thank you, John Shea. It is the large, fluffy one. Cause that. Thank you. Don't find out. Get the fluffy dog a hug. Will do. It's regular submarine. The thing is, if you give the RN just one threat, that makes life too easy for them. Constant preferred all-time cruiser. Take care, Steve M. Take care, Ian Carr, King's Rook, Sean Mack, Anonymous, Thomas Vandervelde. Take care, William Cox. Take care. Oh, hello to your beagle. King's Rook, DGB40, thank you. Boris Real, thank you. Good night. And Steve M, thank you. Constratus, thank you. Howard Maxey, thank you. Kedron, thank you. Sean Mack. Wesley Phillips, thank you. Sam Thompson, thank you. Yogi Khan, thank you. And Martin Henry, thank you. Alwazaski, thank you. Andrew Ben, thank you. The guy named Dan, hello and thank you. Avian Enterprise, take care. And Bitron, Peter Colding, thank you. Nutty Hyper One, thank you. Oh, thank you, everyone.